Preface and Chapter 1 of Stories Worth Rereading. Recording by Teresa Bauman. Stories Worth Rereading by Various. Preface. All persons like stories. Children call for them from their earliest years. The purpose of this book is to provide children and youth with stories worth rereading, stories relating incidents of history, missionary effort, and home and school experiences. These stories will inspire, instruct, and entertain the readers. Nearly all of these have appeared in print before, and are reprinted in this form through the courteous permission of their writers and publishers. Stories Worth Rereading can be obtained only as a premium with the Youth's Instructor, a 16-page weekly, published by the Review and Herald Publishing Association, Tacoma Park, Washington, D.C. End of preface. Chapter 1. Their Word of Honor. The president of the Great B railway system laid down the letter he had just reread 3 times and turned about in his chair with an expression of extreme annoyance. "I wish it were possible," he said slowly, "to find one boy or man in 1,000 who would receive instructions and carry them out to the letter without a single variation from the course laid down. Cornelius," he looked up sharply at his son, who sat at a desk close by, "I hope you are carrying out my ideas with regards to your sons. I've not seen much of them lately. The lad Cyrus seems to me a promising fellow, but I'm not so sure of Cornelius. He appears to be acquiring a sense of his own importance as Cornelius Woodbridge III, which is not desirable, sir, not desirable. By the way, Cornelius, have you yet applied the Hezekiah Woodbridge test to your boys?" Cornelius Woodbridge, Jr., looked up from his work with a smile. "No, I have not, father," he said. "It's a family tradition, and if the proper care has been taken that the boys should not learn of it, it will be as much a test for them as it was for you and for me and for my father. You have not forgotten the day I gave it to you, Cornelius?" "That would be impossible," said his son, still smiling. The elder man's somewhat stern features relaxed, and he sat back in his chair with a chuckle. "Do it at once," he requested, "and make it a stiff one. You know their characteristics. Give it to them hard. I feel pretty sure of Cyrus. But Cornelius?" He shook his head doubtfully and returned to his letter. Suddenly he wheeled around again. "Do it Thursday, Cornelius," he said in his peremptory way, "and whichever of them stands it shall go with us on the tour of inspection. That will be reward enough, I fancy." "Very well, sir," replied his son, and the 2 men went on with their work without further words. They were in the habit of dispatching important business with the smallest possible waste of breath. On Thursday morning, immediately after breakfast, Cyrus Woodbridge found himself summoned to his father's library. He presented himself at once, a round-cheeked, bright-eyed lad of 15, with an air of alertness in every line of him. "Cyrus," said his father, "I have a commission for you to undertake, of a character which I cannot now explain to you. I want you to take this envelope," he held out a large and bulky packet, "and, without saying anything to anyone, follow its instructions to the letter. I ask of you your word of honor that you will do so." The 2 pairs of eyes looked into each other for a moment, singularly alike in a certain intent expression, developed into great keenness in the man, but showing as yet only an extreme wide-awakeness in the boy. Cyrus Woodbridge had an engagement with a young friend in half an hour, but he responded firmly, "I will, sir." "On your honor?" "Yes, sir." "That is all I want. Go to your room and read your instructions. Then start at once." Mr. Woodbridge turned back to his desk with the nod and smile of dismissal to which Cyrus was accustomed. The boy went to his room, opening the envelope as soon as he had closed the door. It was filled with smaller envelopes, numbered in regular order. Enfolding these was a typewritten paper which read as follows: "Go to the reading room of the Westchester Library. There open envelope number 1. Remember to hold all instructions secret. C.W. Jr." Cyrus whistled. "That's funny. It means my date with Harold is off. Well, here goes." He stopped on his way out to telephone his friend of his detention, took a Westchester Avenue car at the nearest point, and in 20 minutes was at the library. He found an obscure corner and opened envelope number 1. "Go to the office of W. K. Newton, room 703, 10th floor, Norfolk Building, X Street, reaching there by 9:30 a.m. Ask for letter addressed to Cornelius Woodbridge, Jr. On way down elevator, open envelope number 2. Cyrus began to laugh. At the same time he felt a trifle irritated. "What's father at?" he questioned in perplexity. Here I am away uptown, and he orders me back to the Norfolk building. I passed it on my way up. Must be he made a mistake. Told me to obey instructions, though. He usually knows just about why he does things." Meanwhile, Mr. Woodbridge had sent for his elder son, Cornelius. A tall youth of 17 with strong family features, varied by a droop in the eyelids and a slight drawl in his speech, lounged to the door of the library. Before entering, he straightened his shoulders. He did not, however, quicken his pace. "Cornelius," said his father, promptly, "I wish to send you upon an errand of some importance, but of possible inconvenience to you. I have not time to give you instructions, but you will find them in this envelope. I ask you to keep the matter and your movements strictly to yourself. May I have from you your word of honor that I can trust you to follow the orders to the smallest detail?" Cornelius put on a pair of eyeglasses and held out his hand for the envelope. His manner was almost indifferent. Mr. Woodbridge withheld the packet and spoke with decision. "I cannot allow you to look at the instructions until I have your word of honor that you will fulfill them." "Is not that asking a good deal, sir?" "Perhaps so," said Mr. Woodbridge, "but no more than is asked of trusted messengers every day. I will assure you that the instructions are mine and represent my wishes." "How long will it take?" inquired Cornelius, stooping to flick an imperceptible spot of dust from his trousers. "I do not find it necessary to tell you." Something in his father's voice sent the languid Cornelius to an erect position and quickened his speech. "Of course I will go," he said, but he did not speak with enthusiasm. "And your word of honor?" "Certainly, sir." The hesitation before the promise was only momentary. "Very well. I will trust you. Go to your room before opening your instructions." And the second, somewhat mystified boy went out of the library on that memorable Thursday morning to find his first order one which sent him to a remote district of the city, with the direction to arrive there within 3/4 of an hour. Out on an electric car, Cyrus was speeding to another suburb. After getting the letter from the 10th floor of Norfolk building, he had read, "Take crosstown car on L Street, transfer to Louisville Avenue, and go out to Kingston Heights. Find corner West and Dwight Streets and open envelope number 3. Cyrus was growing more and more puzzled, but he was also getting interested. At the corner specified, he hurriedly tore open number 3, but found to his amazement only the singular direction. "Take suburban Underground Road for Duane Street Station. From there go to Sentinel office and secure a 3rd edition of yesterday's paper. Open envelope number 4. "Well, what under the sun, moon, and stars did he send me out to Kingston Heights for?" cried Cyrus aloud. He caught the next train, thinking longingly of his broken engagement with Harold Dunning, and of certain plans for the afternoon which he was beginning to fear might be thwarted if this seemingly endless and aimless excursion continued. He looked at the packet of unopened envelopes. "It would be easy to break open the whole outfit and see what this game is," he thought. "Never knew father to do a thing like this before. If it's a joke," his fingers felt the seal of envelope number 4, "I might as well find it out at once. Still, father would never joke with a fellow's promise the way he asked it of me. My word of honor, that's putting it pretty strong. I'll see it through, of course. My, but I'm getting hungry. It must be near luncheon time." It was not, but by the time Cyrus had been ordered twice across the city and once up a 16-story building in which the elevator service was out of order, it was past noon, and he was in a condition to find envelope number 7 a very satisfactory one. "Go to Café Renaud on Westchester Square. Take a seat at table in left alcove. Ask waiter for card of Cornelius Woodbridge, Jr. Before ordering luncheon, read envelope number 8. The boy lost no time in obeying this command, and sank into his chair in the designated alcove with a sigh of relief. He mopped his brow and drank a glass of ice water at a gulp. It was a warm October day, and the 16 flights had been somewhat trying. He asked for his father's card and then sat studying the attractive menu. "I think I'll have—" he mused for a moment, then said with a laugh, "Well, I'm about hungry enough to eat the whole thing. Bring me the—" Then he recollected, paused, and reluctantly pulled out envelope number 8, and broke the seal. "Just a minute," he murmured to the waiter. Then his face turned scarlet, and he stammered under his breath, Why, this can't be." Envelope number 8 ought to have been bordered with black, judging by the dismay its order to a lecture hall to hear a famous electrician caused. But the Woodbridge blood was up now, and it was with an expression resembling that of his grandfather Cornelius, under strong indignation, that Cyrus stalked out of that charming place to proceed grimly to the lecture hall. "Who wants to hear a lecture on an empty stomach?" he groaned. "I suppose I'll be ordered out, anyway, the minute I sit down and stretch my legs. Wonder if father can be exactly right in his mind. He doesn't believe in wasting time, but I'm wasting it today by the bucketful. Suppose he's doing this to size me up some way. He isn't going to tire me out so quick as he thinks. I'll keep going till I drop. Nevertheless, when, just as he was getting interested, he was ordered to go 3 miles to a football field, and then ordered away again without the sight of the game he had planned for a week to see, his disgust was intense. All through that long, warm afternoon he raced about the city and suburbs, growing wearier and more empty with every step. The worst of it was the orders were beginning to assume the form of a schedule, and commanded that he be here at 3:15 and there at 4:05, and so on, which forbade loitering, had he been inclined to loiter. In it all he could see no purpose except the possible one of trying his physical endurance. He was a strong boy, or he would have been quite exhausted long before he reached envelope number 17, which was the last but 3 of the packet. This read, "Reach home at 6:20 p.m. Before entering house, read number 18." Leaning against one of the big white stone pillars on the porch of his home, Cyrus wearily tore open number 18, and the words fairly swam before his eyes. He had to rub them hard to make sure he was not mistaken. Go again to Kingston Heights, corner of West and Dwight Streets, reaching there by 6:50. Read number 19. The boy looked up at the windows, desperately angry at last. If his pride and his sense of the meaning of that phrase, "my word of honor," as the men of the Woodbridge family were in the habit of teaching their sons, had not been of the strongest sort, he would have rebelled and gone defiantly and stormily in. As it was, he stood for one long minute with his hands clenched and his teeth set. Then he turned and walked down the steps away from the longed-for dinner, and out toward L Street and the car for Kingston Heights. As he did so, inside the house, on the other side of the curtains, from behind which he had been anxiously peering, Cornelius Woodbridge, Sr., turned around and struck his hands together, rubbing them in a satisfied way. "He's come and gone," he cried softly, "and he's on time to the minute." Cornelius, Jr., did not so much as lift his eyes from the evening paper as he quietly answered, "Is he?" but the corners of his mouth slightly relaxed. The car seemed to crawl out to Kingston Heights. As it at last neared its terminus, a strong temptation seized the boy Cyrus. He had been on a purposeless errand to this place once that day. The corner of West and Dwight Streets lay more than a half-mile from the end of the car route, and it was an almost untenanted district. His legs were very tired, his stomach ached with emptiness. Why not wait out the interval which it would take to walk out to the corner and back, in a little suburban station, read envelope number 19, and spare himself? He had certainly done enough to prove that he was a faithful messenger. Had he? Certain old and well-worn words came to his mind. They had been in his writing book in the early school days. A chain is no stronger than its weakest link. Cyrus jumped off the car before it fairly stopped, and started at a hot pace for the corner of West and Dwight Streets. There must be no weak places in his word of honor. Doggedly he went to the extreme limit of the indicated route, even taking the longest way round to make the turn. As he started back, beneath the arc light at the corner, there suddenly appeared a city messenger boy. He approached Cyrus, and grinning, held out an envelope. "Ordered to give you this," he said, "if you made connections. If you've been later than 5 minutes past 7, I was to keep dark. You've got 7.5 minutes to spare. Queer orders, but the big railroad boss, Woodbridge, gave 'em to me." Cyrus made his way back to the car with some self-congratulations that served to brace up the muscles behind his knees. This last incident showed him plainly that his father was putting him to severe test of some sort, and he could have no doubt that it was for a purpose. His father was the sort of man who does things with a very definite purpose indeed. Cyrus looked back over the day with an anxious searching of his memory to be sure that no detail of the singular service required him had been slighted. As he once more ascended the steps of his own home, he was so confident that his labors were now ended that he almost forgot about envelope number 20, which he had been directed to read in the vestibule before entering the house. With his thumb on the bell button, he recollected, and with a sigh broke open the final seal. "Turn about and go to Lenox Street Station, B Railroad, reaching there by 8:05. Wait for messenger in west end of station by telegraph office." It was a blow, but Cyrus had his second wind now. He felt like a machine, a hollow one, which could keep on going indefinitely. The Lenox Street Station was easily reached on time. The hands of the big clock were only 1 minute past 8 when Cyrus entered. At the designated spot the messenger met him. Cyrus recognized him as a porter on one of the trains of the road, of which his grandfather and father were officers. Why, yes, he was the porter of the Woodbridge special car. He brought the boy a card which ran thus: "Give Porter the letter from Norfolk Building, the card received at restaurant, the lecture coupon, yesterday evening Sentinel, and the envelope received at Kingston Heights." Cyrus silently delivered up these articles, feeling a sense of thankfulness that not one was missing. The porter went away with them, but was back in 3 minutes. "This way, sir," he said, and Cyrus followed, his heart beating fast. Down the track he recognized the Fleet Wing, President Woodbridge's private car. and Grandfather Cornelius he knew to be just starting on a tour of his own and other roads, which included a flying trip to Mexico. Could it be possible? In the car, his father and grandfather rose to meet him. Cornelius Woodbridge, Sr., was holding out his hand. "Cyrus, lad," he said, his face one broad, triumphant smile, "you have stood the test, the Hezekiah Woodbridge test, sir, and you may be proud of it. Your word of honor can be depended upon. You are going with us through 19 states and Mexico. Is that reward enough for one day's hardships?" "I think it is, sir," agreed Cyrus, his round face reflecting his grandfather's smile, intensified. "Was it a hard pull, Cyrus?" questioned the senior Woodbridge with interest. Cyrus looked at his father. "I don't think so. Now, sir," he said. Both gentlemen laughed. "Are you hungry?" "Well, just a little, grandfather." "Dinner will be served the moment we're off. We have only 6 minutes to wait. I am very much afraid." The old gentleman turned to gaze searchingly out the car window into the station. "That another boy's word of honor is not—" He stood, watch in hand. The conductor came in and remained, awaiting orders. 2 minutes more, Mr. Jefferson," he said. 1.5 minute. He spoke sternly. "Pull out at 8:14 on the second, sir." "Ah!" The porter entered hurriedly and delivered a handful of envelopes into Grandfather Cornelius's grasp. The old gentleman scanned them at a glance. Yes, all right," he cried, with the strongest evidence of excitement Cyrus had ever seen in his usually quiet manner. As the train made its first gentle motion of departure, a figure appeared in the doorway. Quietly, and not at all out of breath, Cornelius Woodbridge, III, walked into the car. Then Grandfather Woodbridge grew impressive. He advanced and shook hands with his grandson as if he were greeting a distinguished member of the board of directors. Then he turned to his son and shook hands with him also solemnly. His eyes shone through his gold-rimmed spectacles, but his voice was grave with feeling. "I congratulate you, Cornelius," he said, "on possessing 2 sons whose word of honor is above reproach. The smallest deviation from the outlined schedule would have resulted disastrously. 10 minutes' tardiness at the different points would have failed to obtain the requisite documents. Your sons did not fail. They can be depended upon. The world is in search of men built on those lines. I congratulate you, sir." Cyrus was glad presently to escape to his stateroom with Cornelius. "Say, what did you have to do?" he asked eagerly. "Did you trot your legs off all over town?" "Not much I didn't," said Cornelius grimly from the depths of a big towel. "I spent the whole day in a little hole of a room at the top of an empty building, with just 10 trips down the stairs to the ground floor to get envelopes at certain minutes. I had not a crumb to eat nor a thing to do, and could not even snatch a nap for fear I'd oversleep one of my dates at the bottom." "I believe that was worse than mine," commented Cyrus reflectively. "I should say it was. If you don't think so, try it." "Dinner, boys," said their father's voice at the door, and they lost no time in responding. End of Their Word of Honor.
Chapter 2 of Stories Worth Rereading. Recording by Andrew Jasper Sutton. Stories Worth Rereading by Various. Chapter 2. Heroism. A tone of pride or petulance repressed. A selfish inclination firmly fought. A shadow of annoyance set at naught. A measure of disquietude suppressed. A peace in opportunity possessed. A reconcilement generously sought. A purpose put aside, a vanquished thought. A word of self-explaining unexpressed. Trifles they seem, these petty soul restraints, yet he who proves them so must needs possess a constancy and courage grand and bold. They are the trifles that have made the saints. Give me to practise them in humbleness, and nobler power than mine doth no man hold. End of Chapter 2. Recording by Andrew Jasper Sutton.
Chapter 3 of Stories Worth Rereading. Recording by Kimberly Welch, Tampa. Stories Worth Rereading by Various. Chapter 3. Muriel's Bright Idea. My friend Muriel is the youngest daughter in a large family of busy people. They are in moderate circumstances, and the original breadwinner has been long gone. So, in order to enjoy many of the comforts and a few of the luxuries of life, the young people have to be wage earners. I'm not sure that they would enjoy life any better than they do now if such were not the case, though there are doubtless times when they would like to be less busy. Still, even this condition has its compensations. Other people do not know how lovely vacations are, was the way Esther expressed it as she sat one day on the side porch, hands folded lightly in her lap, and an air of delicious idleness about her entire person. It was her week of absolute leisure, which she had earned by a season of hard work. She's a public school teacher, belonging to a section and grade where they work their teachers 14 hours of the 24. Alice is a music teacher and goes all day from house to house in town and from school to school with her music roll in hand. Ben, a young brother, is studying medicine in a doctor's office, also in town, and serving the doctor between times to pay for his opportunities. There are two others, an older brother just started in business for himself, and a sister in a training school for nurses. So it was that this large family scattered each morning to their duties in the city 10 miles away, and gathered at night like chickens to the home nest, which was mothered by the dearest little woman who gave much of her time and strength to the preparation of favorite dishes with which to greet the wage earners as they gathered at night around the home table. It's a very happy family, but it was not about any of them that I set out to tell you. In truth, it was Muriel's apron that I wanted to talk about, but it seemed necessary to describe the family in order to secure full appreciation of the apron. Muriel, I should tell you, is still a high school girl, hoping to be graduated next year, though at times a little anxious lest she may not pass, and with ambitions to enter college as soon as possible. The entire family have ambitions for Muriel, and I believe that she will get to college in another year. But about her apron. I saw it first one morning when I crossed the street to my neighbor's side door that opens directly into the large living room and met Muriel in the doorway. As pretty a picture as a fair-haired, bright-eyed girl of 17 can make. She was in what she called her uniform, a short dress made of dark print, cut lower in the neck than a street dress. It had elbow sleeves, and a bit of white braid stitched on their bands and around the square neck set off the little costume charmingly. Her apron was of strong dark green denim, wide enough to cover her dress completely. It had a bib waist held in place by shoulder straps, and the garment fastened behind with a single button, making it adjustable in a second. But its distinctive feature was a row of pockets, or rather several rows of them, extending across the front breadth. They were of varying sizes and all bulged out as if well filled. "What in the world?" I began, and stared at the pockets. Muriel's merry laugh rang out. "Haven't you seen my pockets before?" she asked. "They astonish you, of course. Everybody laughs at them, but I am proud of them. They are my own invention. You see, we're such a busy family all day long, and so tired when we get home at night, that we have a bad habit of dropping things just where they happen to land and leaving them. By the last of the week, this big living room is a sight to behold. It used to take half my morning to pick up the 1,001 things that did not belong here and carry them to their places. You do not know how many journeys I had to make, because I was always overlooking something. So I invented this apron with a pocket in it for every member of the family, and it works like a charm. Look at this big one with a bee on it. That is for Ben, of course, and it is always full. Ben is a great boy to leave his pencils and his handkerchiefs and everything else about. Last night, he even discarded his necktie because it felt choky. This pocket is Esther's. She leaves her letters and her discarded handkerchiefs as well as her gloves. And Kate sheds hair ribbons and hat pins wherever she goes. Just think how lovely it is to have a pocket for each and drop things in as fast as I find them. When I'm all through dusting, I have simply to travel once around the house and unpack my load. I cannot tell you how much time and trouble and temper my invention has saved me." "It is a bright idea," I said, "and I mean to pass it on. There are other living rooms and busy girls. Whose is that largest pocket, marked M?" "Why, I made it for Mother. But do you know, I have found out just in this very way that mothers do not leave things lying around. It is queer, isn't it, when they have so many cares? It seems to be natural for mothers to think about other people. So I made the M stand for miscellaneous, and I put into that pocket articles which will not classify and that belong to all of us. There are hosts of things for which no particular one seems to be responsible. Is it not a pity that I did not think of pockets last winter, when we all had special cares and were so dreadfully busy? It is such a simple idea, you would have supposed that any person would have thought of it, but it took me 2 years. I just had to do it this spring because there simply was not time to run up and down stairs so much. You've proved once more the truth of the old proverb, necessity is the mother of invention, I said. And besides, you have given me a new idea. I'm going home to work it out. When it is finished, I will show it to you. Then I went home and made rows and rows of strong pockets to sew on a folding screen I was making for my workroom. Pansy in Christian Endeavor World. By permission of Lothrop, Lee, and Shepherd Company. End of chapter 3.
Chapter 4 of Stories Worth Rereading. Stories Worth Rereading by Various. Just do your best. Just do your best. It matters not how small, how little heard of. Just do your best, that's all. Just do your best. God knows it all, and in His great plan you count as one. Just do your best until the work is done. Just do your best, reward will come to those who stand the test. God does not forget. Press on, nor doubt, nor fear, just do your best. Ernest Lloyd. End of chapter 4. Recording by Sarah Hale.
Chapter 5 of Stories Worth Rereading. Recording by Ross Clate, June 3rd, 2K16, Roebuck, South Carolina. Stories Worth Rereading by Various. Chapter 5. The Strength of Clinton. When Clinton Stevens was 11 years old, he was taken very sick with pneumonia. During convalescence, he suffered an unexpected relapse, and his mother and the doctor worked hard to keep him alive. "It is 10 to 1 if he gets well," said Dr. Bemis, shaking his head. "If he does, he will never be very strong." Mrs. Stevens smoothed Clinton's pillow even more tenderly than before. Poor Clinton, who had always been such a rollicking, rosy-cheeked lad, surely it was hard to bear. The long March days dragged slowly along, and April was well advanced before Clinton could sit at the window and watch the grass grow green on the slope of the lawn. He looked frail and delicate. He had a cough, too, a troublesome bark that he always kept back as long as he could. The bright sunlight poured steadily in through the window, and Clinton held up his hand to shield his eyes. "Why, Ma Stevens," he said after a moment, "just look at my hands. They are as thin and white as a girl's, and they used to be regular paws. It does not look as if I would pull many weeds for Mr. Carter this summer, does it?" Mrs. Stevens took his thin hands in her own patient ones. "Never mind, dearie," she said. "They will grow plump and brown again, I hope." A group of school children were passing by, shouting and frolicking. Clinton leaned forward and watched them till the last one was gone. Some of them waved their caps, but he did not seem elated. "Mother," he said presently, "I believe I will go to bed if you will help me. I guess I am not quite so strong now as I used to be." Clinton did not pull weeds for Mr. Carter that summer, but he rode around with the milkman and did a little outdoor work for his mother, which helped him to mend. One morning in July he surprised the village by riding out on his bicycle, but he overdid the matter, and it was several weeks before he again appeared. His cough still continued, though not so severe as in the spring, and it was decided to let him go to school in the fall. Dr. Bemis told Mrs. Stevens that the schoolroom would be a good place to test Clinton's strength, and he was right. In no other place does a young person's strength develop or debase itself so readily, for honor or dishonor. Of course, the doctor had referred to physical strength, but moral strength is much more important. Clinton was a bright lad for his years, and although he had not looked into his books during the summer, he was placed in the same grade he had left when taken sick. He did not find much difficulty in keeping up with any of his studies except spelling. Whenever he received a perfect mark on that subject, he felt that a real victory had been won. About Christmas time, the regular examinations were held. The teacher offered a prize to each grade, the pupil receiving the highest average in all studies to receive the prize. Much excitement, no little speculation, and a great deal of studying ensued. Clinton felt fairly confident over all his studies except spelling. So he carried his spelling book home every night, and he and his mother spent the evenings in wrestling with the long and difficult words. Examination day came at length, and the afternoon for the 7th grade spelling was at hand. The words were to be written and handed in. Across the aisle from Clinton sat Harry Myers. Several times when teacher pronounced a word, Harry looked slyly into the palm of his hand. Clinton watched him, his cheeks growing pink with shame. Then he looked round at the others. Many of them had some dishonest device for copying the words. Clinton swallowed something in his throat and looked across at Matthews, who pursed up his lips and nodded, as if to say that he understood. The papers were handed in, and school was dismissed. On Monday, after the morning exercises, Miss Brooks gave out the prizes to the 3 grades under her care. "I have now to award the prize for the highest average to the 7th grade," she said. "But first, I wish to say a few words on your conduct during the recent examination in spelling. I shall censure no one in particular, although there is one boy who must set no more bad examples. No one spelled the words correctly, Clinton Stevens the least of any, making his average quite low, yet the prize goes to him. I will tell you why," as a chorus of "Oh, oh" greeted her ears. "Spelling is Clinton's hardest subject, but he could easily have spelled more words right had he not possessed sufficient strength to prevent him from falling into the way followed by some of you." As Clinton went up the aisle for his prize, he felt like crying, but he managed to smile instead. A few days before, Harry Myers had ridiculed him because he was not strong enough to throw a snowball from the schoolhouse to the road. Now the teacher had said he was strong. Clinton's Aunt Jenny came to visit the family in December, bringing her little daughter Grace with her. Now Grace had a mania for pulling other people's hair, but there was no one in the Stevens family upon whom she dared operate except Clinton. She began on him cautiously, then aggressively. Clinton stood it for a while, and then asked her, politely but firmly, to stop. She stopped for half a day. One night Clinton came home from school pale and tired. Some of the boys had been taunting him on his spare frame and imitating his cough, which had grown worse as the winter advanced. Sitting down by the window, he looked out at the falling snow. Grace slipped up behind him and gave his hair a sharp tweak. He struck out hastily and hit her. She was not hurt, only very much surprised, but she began to cry lustily, and Aunt Jenny came hurrying in and took the child in her arms. That night after supper, Clinton went into the sitting room and called Grace to him. "I want to tell you something," he said. "I am sorry that I hit you, and I ask your pardon. Will you forgive me, dear?" Grace agreed quickly and said shyly, "Next time I want to pull anyone's hair, I will pull my own." Aunt Jenny was in the next room and overheard the conversation. "It strikes me, Sarah," she said to Mrs. Stevens, later, "that Clinton is a remarkably strong boy for one who is not strong. Most boys would not have taken the trouble to ask a small girl to forgive them, even if they were very much in the wrong. But Clinton has a strong character." The year Clinton was 13, the boys planned to have a corn roast one August night. "We will get the corn in old Carter's lot," said Harry Myers. "He has just acres of it and can spare a bushel or so as well as not. I suppose you will go with us, Clint?" Clinton hesitated. "No," said he, "I guess not, and I should think if you want to roast corn, you could get it out of your own gardens. But if Mr. Carter's corn is better than any other, why can you not ask him?" "Oh, come now," retorted Harry. "Do not let it worry you. Half the fun of roasting corn is in taking it. And don't you come, Clinton. Don't. We would not have you for the world. You are too nice, Mr. Coffin." Clinton's cheeks flushed red, but he turned away without a word. When Mr. Carter quizzed Billy Matthews and found out all about it, Clinton was made very happy by the old man's words. "It is not every chap that will take the stand you took. You ought to be thankful that you have the strength to say no." In the fall, when Clinton was 15, his health began to fail noticeably, and Dr. Bemis advised a little wine to build him up. "Mother," said the boy, after thinking it over, "I am not going to touch any wine. I can get well without it. I know I can. I do not want liquor," he continued. "Wine is a mocker, you know. Did you not tell me once that Zyke Hastings over in East Bloomfield became a drunkard by drinking wine when he was sick?" "Yes, Clinton, I believe I told you so." "Well, then, I do not want any wine. I have seen Zyke Hastings too many times." In December, Aunt Jenny and Grace made their annual visit. With them came Uncle Jonathan, who took a great liking to Clinton. "My boy," said he one day, placing a big hand on the lad's shoulder, "early in the new year Aunt Jenny and I start for the Pacific coast. Should you like to go with us?" "Well, I rather guess I should," gasped the surprised boy, clasping his hands joyfully. "Very well, then, you shall go," returned Uncle Jonathan, "and your mother too." Clinton began to feel better before they were outside of Pennsylvania. When they had crossed the Mississippi and reached the prairies, his eyes were sparkling with excitement. The mountains fairly put new life in him. Uncle Jonathan watched him with pleasure. "Tell me," he said one day, when they were winding in and out among the Rockies, "what has given you so much strength of character?" "Why, it was this way," said Clinton, bringing his eyes in from a chasm some hundreds of feet below. "One day when I was beginning to recover from that attack of pneumonia, I saw a lot of the boys romping along, and I felt pretty bad because I could not romp and play too. Then I thought that if I could not be strong that way, I could have the strength to do right. So I began to try and—" "Succeeded admirably," said Uncle Jonathan approvingly. "And really, my boy, I see no reason why you should not shout and play to your heart's content in a few months." And Uncle Jonathan's words proved true, for Clinton, in a sun-kissed California valley, grew well and strong in a few months. But through all his life he will have cause to be glad that he learned the value of the strength that is gained by resisting temptation, controlling one's spirit, and obeying the Lord's command. Benjamin Keach. End of Chapter 5, The Strength of Clinton.
Chapter 6 of Stories Worth Rereading. Recording by Beth Thomas. Stories Worth Rereading by Various. Chapter 6. The Doctor's Cow. "I'm afraid she's done for," said the veterinary surgeon as he came out of the barn with Dr. Layton after working for an hour over Brindle, who had broken into the feed bins and devoured bran and middlings till she could eat no more. "But keep up the treatment faithfully, and if she lives through the night, she will stand some show of getting well." The doctor walked down through the driveway with the surgeon and stood for a few minutes at the gate under the maple trees that lined the sidewalk, talking earnestly. Then he went back into the house by the kitchen door. His wife met him with the oft-repeated words, "I told you so. I said that boy would turn out of no earthly account." "But he has turned out of some account," contradicted the doctor mildly. "In spite of this carelessness, he has been a great help to me during the last month. It was boyish ignorance more than mere carelessness that brought about this disaster. To be sure, I have cautioned him not to leave the door of the feed-room unfastened, but he had no idea how a cow would make a glutton of herself if she had a chance at the bins. You cannot expect a boy who was reared in a city tenement to learn all about the country and the habits and weaknesses of cattle in one short month. No, I shall not set him adrift again, not even if poor Brindle dies." "You mean to say you are going to keep him just the same, John Layton?" cried the doctor's wife. "Well, if you are not the meekest man, Moses was not anything to you. He did lose his temper once." The doctor smiled and said quietly, "Yes, and missed entering the promised land on account of it. Perhaps I should have done the same thing in his place, but I'm sure that Moses, if he were in my place today, would feel just as I do about discharging Harry. It is pretty safe to assume that he, even if he did lose his temper at the continual grumbling of the croakers who were sighing for the flesh-pots of Egypt, never ordered a young Israelite boy whose father and mother had been bitten by the fiery serpents and died in the wilderness to clear out of camp for not putting a halter on one of the cows. "John Layton, you are talking scripture," remonstrated the perturbed housewife, looking up reprovingly as she sadly skimmed the cream from the very last pan of milk poor Brindle would ever give her. "I certainly am, and I'm going to act scripture too," declared the doctor, with the air of gentle firmness that always ended any controversy between him and his excellent, though somewhat exacting wife. "Harry is a good boy, and he had a good mother too, he says, but he has had a hard life, ill-treated by a father who was bitten by the fiery serpent of drink. Now, because of his first act of negligence, I am not going to set him adrift in the world again." "Not if it costs you a cow?" remarked the woman. "No, my dear, not if it costs me 2 cows," reasserted the doctor. "A cow is less than a boy, and it might cost the world a man if I sent Harry away in a fit of displeasure, disgraced by my discharge, so that he could not find another place in the town to work for his board and go to school. Besides, Brindle will die anyway, and discharging the boy will not save her." "No, of course not, but it was your taking the boy in, a penniless unknown fellow, that has cost you a cow," persisted the wife. "I told you at the time you would be sorry for it." "I have not intimated that I am sorry I took the boy in," remarked the doctor, not perversely, but with steadfast kindness. "If our own little boy had lived, and had done this thing accidentally, would I have been sorry that he had ever been born? Or if little Ted had grown to be 13, and you and I had died in the wilderness of poverty, leaving him to wander out of the city to seek for a home in God's fair country, where his little peaked face could fill out and grow rosy as Harry's had, would you think it just to have him sent away because he had made a boyish mistake? Of course you would not, mother. Your heart is in the right place, even if it does get covered up sometimes. And I guess, to come right down to it, you would not send Harry away any more than I would, when the poor boy is almost heartbroken over this unfortunate affair. Now, let us have supper, for I must be off. We cannot neglect sick people for a poor dying cow. Harry will look after Brindle. He will not eat a bite, I am afraid, so it is no use to call him in now. By and by you had better take a plate of something out to him, but do not say a harsh word to the poor fellow, to make it any harder for him than it is." The doctor ate his supper hurriedly, for the sick cow had engaged every moment of his spare hours that day, and he had postponed until his evening round of visits a number of calls that were not pressing. When he came out to his buggy, Harry Aldous stood at the horse's head, at the carriage steps beside the driveway, his chin sunk on his breast in an attitude of hopeless misery. "Keep up the treatment, Harry. Make her as easy as possible," said the doctor as he stepped into his buggy. "Yes, sir. I'll sit up all night with her, Dr. Layton, if I can only save her," was the choking answer, as the boy carefully spread the lap-robe over the doctor's knees. "I know you will, Harry, but I am afraid nothing can save the poor creature. About all we can do is to relieve her suffering until morning, giving her a last chance. And if she is no better then, the veterinary surgeon says we would better shoot her and put her out of her misery." The boy groaned. "Oh, Dr. Layton, why do you not scold me? I could bear it better if you would just say one cross word," he sobbed. "You have been kinder to me than my own father ever was, and I have tried so hard to be useful to you. Now this dreadful thing has taken place, all because of my carelessness. I wish you would take that buggy whip to me. I deserve it." The doctor took the whip, and gently dropped its lash across the drooping shoulders bowed on the horse's neck, as the boy hid his face in the silken mane he loved to comb. Indeed, Dandy's black satin coat had never shone with such a lustre from excessive currying as in the month past, since the advent of this new little groom, who slept in the little back bedroom of the doctor's big white house, and thought it a nook in paradise. "There's no use in scolding or thrashing a fellow who is all broken up anyway over an accident, as you are," the doctor said kindly. "Of course, it is a pretty costly accident for me, but I think I know where I can get a heifer, one of Brindle's own calves, that I sold to a farmer 2 years ago. That will make as fine a cow as her mother." "But the money, Dr. Layton, how can I ever earn that to make good your loss?" implored the boy, looking up. "The money? Oh, well, some day when you are a rich man you can pay me for the cow," laughed the doctor, taking up the reins. "In the meantime, make a good, trustworthy, honest man of yourself, no matter whether you get rich or not, and keep your thinking cap on a little better." "You had better eat some supper," said a voice in the doorway a little later, as Mrs. Layton came noiselessly to the barn and surprised the boy kneeling on the hay in the horse's stall, adjoining the one where Brindle lay groaning, his face buried in his arms, which were flung out over the manger. The lad scrambled to his feet in deep confusion. "Oh, thank you, Mrs. Layton, but I cannot eat a bite," he protested. "It is ever so good of you to think of me, but I cannot eat anything." "You must," said the doctor's wife firmly. "Come outside and wash in the trough if you do not want to leave Brindle. You can sit near by and watch her if you think you must, though it will not do a particle of good, for she is bound to die anyway. What were you doing in there on your knees? Praying?" The woman's voice softened perceptibly as the question passed her lips, and she looked half pityingly into the pale, haggard young face, thinking of little Ted, and wondering how it would have looked at 13 if he had done this thing. "Yes," muttered Harry, plunging his hands into the water of the trough and splashing it over the red flame of a sudden burning blush that kindled in his ash-pale cheeks. "Isn't it all right to pray for a cow to get well? It most kills me to see her suffer so." Mrs. Layton smiled unwillingly, for the value of her pet cow's products touched her more deeply than a boy's penitent tears, particularly when that boy was not her own. "There is no use of your staying in there and watching her suffer. You cannot do her any good," she insisted. "Stay out here in the fresh air, do you hear?" "Yes, ma'am," choked Harry, drying his face on the sleeve of his gingham shirt. He sat down on a box before the door, the plate of food in his lap, and made an attempt to eat the daintily cooked meal, but every mouthful almost choked him. At about midnight, the sleepless young watcher, lying on the edge of the hay just above the empty manger over which a lantern swung, lifted himself on his elbow at the sound of a long, low, shuddering groan. And in another moment Harry knew that poor Brindle had ceased to suffer the effects of her gluttonous appetite. Creeping down to the stall, he saw at a glance that the cow was dead, and for a moment, alone there in the stillness and darkness of the spring night, he felt as if he were the principal actor in some terrible crime. "Poor old hoss!" he sobbed, kneeling down and putting his arm over the still warm neck. I've killed you, after all the rich milk and butter you have given me, that have made me grow strong and fat, just by my carelessness." In after years, the memory of that hour came back to Harry Aldous as the dominant note in some real tragedy, and he never again smelled the fragrance of new hay, mingled with the warm breath of sleeping cattle, without recalling the misery and self-condemnation of that long night's watch. In the early dawn, Dr. Layton found the boy lying beside the quiet form of the stall, fast asleep from exhaustion and grief, his head pillowed on the soft, tawny coat he loved to brush until it gleamed like silk. "Child alive!" he gasped, bending over and taking the lad in his arms and carrying him out into the sweet morning air. "Harry, why did you not come and tell me, and then go to bed?" he cried, setting the bewildered boy on his feet and leading him to the house. "Now, my boy, no more of this grieving. The thing is done, and you cannot help it now. There is no more use in crying for a dead cow than for spilled milk. Now, come in and go to bed, and stay there until tonight, and when you wake up, the new heifer, Brindle's daughter, will be in the barn waiting for you to milk her. I am going to buy her this morning." 5 years after that eventful night, Harry Aldous stood on the doctor's front porch, a youth of 18, bidding good-bye to the two who had been more to him than father and mother. He was going to college in the West, where he could work his way, and in his trunk was a high school diploma, and in his pocket a gilt-edged recommendation from Dr. Layton. "God bless you, my boy. Don't forget us," said the doctor, his voice husky with unshed tears, as he wrung the strong young hand that had been so helpful to him in the busy years flown by. "Forget you, my more than father," murmured the young man, not even trying to keep the tears out of his eyes. "No matter how many years it may be before I see you again, I shall always remember your unfailing kindness to me. And can I ever forget how you saved me for a higher life than I could possibly have lived if you had set me adrift in the world again for leaving that barn door unfastened and killing your cow? As long as I live, I shall remember that great kindness, and try to deserve it by my life." "Pshaw, Harry," said the doctor, "that was nothing but common humanity." "Uncommon humanity," corrected the youth. "Goodbye, Mrs. Layton. I shall always remember your kindness too, and that you never gave me any less butter or cream from poor Brindle's daughter for my grave offence. You have been like an own mother to me." "You have deserved it all, Harry," said the doctor's wife, and there was a tear in her eye too, which was an unusual sight, for she was not an emotional woman. "I do not know it was such a great calamity after all, to lose Brindle just as we did, for Daisy is a finer cow than her mother was, and there has not been another chance since to get as good a heifer." "So it was a blessing in disguise after all, Harry," laughed the doctor. "As for you, you have been a blessing undisguised from that day to this. May the Lord bless and prosper you. Write to us often." 4 years passed, and in one of the western states a young college graduate stepped from his pedestal of oratorical honours to take a place among the rising young lawyers of a prosperous new town that was fast developing into a commercial centre. "I am doing well, splendidly," he wrote Dr. Layton after 2 years of hard work, "and one of these days I am coming back to make that promised visit." But the years came and went, and still the West held him in its powerful clutch. Success smiled upon his pathway, and into his life entered the sweet new joy of a woman's love and devotion. Into his home came the happy music of children's voices. When his eldest boy was 8 years old, his district elected him to the state senate, and 4 years later sent him to Congress, an honest, uncompromising adherent to principle and duty. "And now, at last," he wrote Dr. Layton, "I am coming east, and I shall run down from Washington for that long-promised visit. Why do you write so seldom, when I have never yet failed to inform you of my pyrotechnic advancement into the world of politics? It is not fair. And how is the family cow? Surely Madam Daisy sleeps with her poor mother ere this, or has been cut up into roasts and steaks?" And to this letter the doctor replied briefly but gladly. "So you are coming at last, my boy. Well, you will find us in the same old house, a little worse for wear, perhaps, and leading the same quiet life. No, not the same, though it is quiet enough, for I am growing old, and the town is running after the new young doctors, leaving us old ones in the rear to trudge along as best we can. There isn't any family cow now, Harry. Daisy was sold long ago for beef, poor thing. We never got another, for I am getting too old to milk, and there never seemed to come along another boy like the old Harry, who would take all the barnyard responsibility on his shoulders. Besides, mother is crippled with rheumatism, and can hardly get around to do her housework, let alone to make butter. We are not any too well off since the Union Bank failed, for besides losing all my stock, I have had to help pay the depositors' claims. But we have enough to keep us comfortable, and much to be thankful for. Most of all, that our famous son is coming home for a visit. Bring your wife too, Harry, if she thinks it will not be too much of a drop from Washington society to our humble home. And the children, all 5 of those bright boys and girls. Bring them all. I want to show them the old stall in the barn where 25 years ago I picked their father up in my arms one early spring morning as he lay fast asleep on the neck of the old cow over whose expiring breath he had nearly broken his poor little heart." "Yes, father, of course it has paid to come down here. I would not have missed it for all the unanimous votes of the 3rd ballot that sent me east," declared the United States Senator at the end of his 3 days' visit. Long ago, the Honourable Henry Aldous had fallen into the habit of addressing Dr. Layton in his letters by the paternal title. "It does not seem possible that it is 20 years since I stood here, saying good-bye when I started west. By the way, do you remember what you told me that memorable night when the lamented Brindle laid down her life because of my carelessness and her own gluttony? I was standing at the horse's head, and you were sitting in your buggy, there at the carriage steps, and I said I wished you would horsewhip me instead of treating me so kindly. I remember you reached over and tickled my neck with the lash playfully, and told me there was no use in thrashing a fellow who was all broken up anyway over an accident." The doctor laughed as he held his arms more closely about the shoulders of Senator Aldis's 2 eldest boys, while Grandmother Layton, with little Ted in her lap, was dreaming again of the little form that had long, long ago been laid in a graveyard on the hillside. "Yes, yes," said the doctor, "I remember. What a blessed thing it was I did not send you off that day to the tune the old cow died on." And he laughed through his tears. "Blessed?" echoed Mrs. Layton, putting down the wriggling Ted. "It was providential. You know, Harry, I was not so kind-hearted as John in those days, and I thought he ought to send you off, but he declared he would not, even if you had cost him 2 cows. He said that if he did, it might cost the world a man, and so it would have, if all they say you are doing out west for clean government is true." Senator Aldous laughed and kissed the old lady. "I do not know about that," he said modestly. "I am of the opinion that he might have saved more of a man for the world, but certain it is he saved whatever manhood there was in that boy from going to waste by his noble act of kindness. But what I remember most, father, is what you told me there at the carriage step, that when I became a rich man I could pay you for that cow. Well, I'm not exactly a rich man, for I'm not in politics for all the money that I can get out of it, but I am getting a better income than my leaving that barn door open would justify anyone in believing I could ever get by my brains. So now I can pay that long-standing debt without inconvenience. It may come handy for you to have a little fund laid by, since the Union Bank went to smash and all your stock with it. And so much of your other funds went to pay the poor depositors of that defunct institution. It was just like you, father, not to dodge the assessments, as so many of the stockholders did, by putting all your property in your wife's name. So, since you made one investment 25 years ago that has not seemed to depreciate in value very much, an investment in a raw young boy who did not have enough gumption to fasten a barn door, here is the interest on what the investment was worth to the boy, at least a little of it, for I can never begin to pay it all. Goodbye, both of you, and may God bless you. Here comes our carriage, Helen." When the dust of the departing hack had filtered through the morning sunlight, two pairs of tear-dimmed eyes gazed at the slip of blue paper in Dr. Layton's hand, a cheque for $5,000. "We saved a man that time, sure enough," murmured the old doctor softly. End of Chapter 6 by Emma S. Allen in The Wellspring.